You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. This is another episode about travel, and I'm very pleased to have on the line a special guest, a friend of mine, and we met in Argentina, in Buenos Aires last year. It's Pete. Hi, Pete.
Hi, Jake. How you doing?
I'm good. You're back in England now, is that right?
I am. I'm in Bristol.
Awesome. Well, I'm really glad that we finally managed to connect on Skype, because I know that in the meantime, since I met you, you've been all around the world. And I wanted to talk to you because I know that you have done long-term travel a couple of times. And I thought that's a very interesting experience for some people to hear about. And so I wanted to just start off by asking, can you just give a kind of overview of you know your trips, because you've been on 2 long-term trips, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So me and my best friend were both keen surfers, and back in 2005 we were putting our heads together and decided we wanted to go and explore some of the world and what waves there were to offer around the world, of which there are obviously many. My friend John wasn't so happy in his job. I was ready for a break as well, and had always wanted to go traveling since university. So we started putting a bit of a plan together. And then, sort of October 2006, we left the UK, myself for just over a year, and my friend made it for about 6 months on a smaller budget. We basically planned a trip based on waves and surfing, with a few other spots to see along the way. Set off with our boards, starting in Costa Rica, working our way down the west coast to South America, so through Ecuador, Peru, Chile. A brief stint across in Rio in Brazil, back to Chile, bit of time in the mountains of Argentina. And then we flew on to New Zealand, to Australia, where my friend John flew home. And I carried on through some of Australia into Southeast Asia and visited a whole load of countries without my surfboard and more just sort of overland, like Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Thailand, where I've got some friends, on the Philippines. And then I flew on to Africa and saw, where did I go there? Kenya, South Africa, Namibia, and Zambia before returning to the UK.
Awesome.
So that was trip 1, which was fairly well planned, and mainly focused around surfing and visiting friends, mostly university friends I have around the world. Trip 2 was on my own, but obviously I met a lot of people, like-minded people like yourself, Jake, along the way.
Yeah.
And that was more less focused on one thing, really. I took some climbing gear with me. I took some photography equipment. But it was more about actually revisiting some areas like South America, and revisiting other areas that I've been to, and I guess traveling a bit slower and seeing more variety and just meeting people and going with the flow rather than having a definite plan. We want to surf here, we want to surf there.
Right.
So that's, I guess, the travels.
Awesome. I wanted to ask you, I definitely want to ask you more about the trips, because it sounds so great, the places that you went to. But I wanted to ask you about the sort of the lead up to this and the thinking behind it, because this is something a lot of people want to do, but it's not something that many people actually end up doing. And I know it reminds me of the idea in the book, The 4-Hour Workweek, of taking like mini retirements. Where you basically take some time out of your career to enjoy the opportunity to travel, while you're young, and while you can really make the most of it, rather than waiting, until you're old. And I wanted to ask, were you influenced by any books like that, or did you just decide to do this?
No, I wasn't influenced by any books like that, although I have read that book since returning to the UK. No, I think what inspired me was really a love of travel and seeing new places and experiencing different things. Yeah, definitely having a break from working was a big deal for me. I felt that I guess we're very different people when, or yeah, we tend to get bogged down and almost characterized by our work because it takes up so much time in our weekly, monthly life. And I guess on my first trip, I found that I became, in some ways, quite a different person when I took that away. And it allowed me to, the cliched sort of find yourself, I wouldn't use that, but it certainly allowed me to understand better what I wanted out of life. Look back at kind of the work that I've been doing and actually analyze, okay, is that something that I want to do further? Is that a career that suits me? And really give you time to take stock of that and take stock of your life and who you are and maybe what you want going forward, which is quite hard to do when you're working.
Yeah.
It's quite hard to get that time. So yeah, definitely saw it as a break from working, which I recommend to anyone, not just because it's great fun and you can pursue interests that you normally only do outside of work life and your weekends and holidays, but it gives you a lot more time, I guess, to think and really, understand how to approach life going forward in a way that's going to suit you better.
Yeah. Now, in doing so, you obviously gave up your job. Can you talk a little bit about sort of your experience with that? Because that I think is something that some people would find, scary or challenging. And obviously, you were going away for a long period of time, so you weren't going to necessarily be able to go back to the same job afterwards. So what was your thinking about doing that? And was it challenging, or did you just had enough at that point?
No, I mean, I was pretty happy with my job, unlike my friend, the first time I went traveling. And
do you mind if I ask what you were doing, by the way?
Yeah, I work in IT sales. So I sell software and sort of consultancy solutions to a range of businesses. And that's what I still do now.
Right.
And I guess the nature of that kind of role made it easier for me because providing you're a successful salesperson, have a good career history and can prove that you've done well for other companies, often there's jobs out there because people move around. So for me, the job market in that career is always fairly fluid, therefore I wasn't too worried. And also because I was already at a point where I felt I was fairly senior and I'd got some good experience, I could always come back in at that level, and I didn't feel like a year away from the career that I was losing a great deal. Actually, on the contrary, I found on returning that looking back, I actually had developed really positively as a person, had developed a lot of skills that were absolutely applicable in my career.
I can imagine that because, sorry, I was just going to say I can imagine that, especially if you're in sales, then if you travel the world, met all these people, you're going to have gained a lot of empathy and communication skills and so forth. So I can see how that would help. Yeah, communication, planning, negotiation, getting yourself in and out of situations. It's traveling and backpacking. It teaches you a lot of life skills, but it also, like you say, teaches you a lot of communication and understanding of people, which helps you massively in a sales role. So the first time I came back, the people who employed me within a month of being back in the UK certainly saw that as a positive. And the same again when I got back this time. I was even more able to articulate why my travels have been valuable and why they helped me develop as a person and why that makes me more employable. Yeah, you see, I think that's so awesome because there's this sort of idea that that you need to work on your CV or on your resume, as they call it in America, where supposedly supposed to show that you've been in this job for a reasonable length of time and then moved on to the next one. And some people, I think, are worried that if they go and do something for themselves that is going to be an awesome life experience that gives them fulfillment and stuff, then they're going to be, somehow penalized in the job market for having taken a year out and done something interesting. And what you're saying is that it was, not the case at all. In fact, probably the opposite for you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's always going to be a few people out there who might look down their noses at backpackers or people who choose to take these decisions, whether that's out of envy or just sort of short-sightedness. I guess there's always going to be a few people like that, but I've never come across any of them. I've never had any issues in any interviews, providing, obviously, like I say, you're able to articulate what you did, why you went, why you left the previous company, and why you think it's been a positive thing for you. If you just sit down and have a think about what you've done in that career break, in that time away, providing you haven't just been sat on a beach drinking margaritas, there will be a lot of skills that have come out of it.
Yeah, awesome. So just to understand better, how old were you when you did your first trip, and then what was the sort of time period? So you were in your 20s in your first trip, or?
I was 26.
Right.
Yeah. So I was 26, left for just over a year, came back and worked for 5 years, and then left again when I was 33. Right.
And then came back after about another year of travel.
Another year. Yeah, so I got back in September last year.
Yeah, and did you consciously sort of plan and save up to do these trips? Is it something that you had to spend a lot of time sort of preparing for?
The first time I kind of was consciously saving for it, yeah. But again, being in my career kind of helps because you tend to get on occasion, some pretty fat commission checks.
Right.
Which makes it easy to save a big chunk at certain times, So that's good. But the second one, no, to be honest, I wasn't saving for the trip. I was saving, I guess, in general.
Right.
With a view to maybe buying a house or whatever, It's nice to have a pot of money to be able to do something with. And it was only kind of about 6 months before I left on the trip where I actually made the decision that I wanted to go and do something like that again, where I started looking at my, I guess, pot of savings and working how I could do it, how much it would cost, and how I wanted to do it again. But having said that, I've never traveled on a shoestring. You could do these kind of trips a lot cheaper than I did if you needed to. And obviously you could work your way around as well, which makes it much, much cheaper and in some ways more interesting, enjoyable. You meet a lot more people if you're working your way around. And again, it gives you more to talk about potential employer when you come back. I always did some volunteer work on my way around, but never did any paid work. I was lucky to be in that position where I didn't need to.
And yeah, so your choice is that because you basically wanted to spend the time doing the things that you wanted to do, like the surfing and, meeting people, doing stuff like that? So was that your thinking behind not working on your way around?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I did some volunteer work in part. I guess avoiding paid work was less about it was more about actually not being in that mindset where you're working.
Yeah.
It's a different mindset, and it was just something that I enjoyed in my first trip, not having that as a requirement. And it just gives you the freedom to do what you want to do and go where you want to go. So no, it wasn't about freeing up time to do other things. It was more just about actually wanting to be in a particular mindset whilst I'm traveling, giving me freedom.
And what was the volunteering that you did when you were traveling?
I've done a range of stuff, from sort of organic farms, which are fairly typical, to working with charitable schools in South Africa, working on sort of landscape working, removing of non-indigenous plant species, and All sorts, really. More just as a way to meet people and explore different places and feel like, I guess, giving a bit back to some of the communities that I travel through.
Yeah.
And it's not just one big happy holiday.
Right. And yeah, awesome. And I wanted to ask a little bit more about how you chose to travel, because I think that's really interesting for people thinking about this. So I know that you learned Spanish because we actually met in a Spanish school, in a Spanish class in Buenos Aires. And so I wanted to ask you about languages because, obviously you went to many, many different countries. What was your experience about learning languages? Because I presume you can't have learned languages for everywhere that you traveled. So, or did you? What was your experience with that?
Languages, yeah. Well, for me, the traveling experience is made much, much richer if you can learn at least a little bit of the language in the places you're in. If you can learn to a decent level, like I did in South America with Spanish, then it really takes it on to a new level where you can make friends in another language. You can crack jokes in another language. You can even fall in love in another language, which is pretty good fun. But having said that, you don't necessarily need it. I met plenty of people trying around South America who didn't hardly spoke a word of Spanish. They were still having a great time. In terms of other places like Southeast Asia and Africa, actually, you find a lot more people who do speak English, particularly on the more well-trodden tourist trails. So it's easier to get around without it, and you just again learn some basic stuff to chat with the locals and make some people smile now and again, and that gets you by. But really, Spanish was the only language that I ever studied and ever really tried to get to a decent level at. And it really does make the traveling experience so much richer.
Well, it's so that's the great advantage of Spanish with South America is that you can actually use it to go all over a continent, and so it's a great opportunity in that sense. Absolutely,
yeah. South and Central America, other than Brazil, which I found quite difficult. Everyone speaks the same language, albeit different dialects and accents here and there. But generally, you can make yourself understood. And that's why South America is one of the reasons why South America is my favorite continent to travel in by a long way. Yeah.
Awesome. So I wanted to ask you, looking back on either of your trips, overall, what were your best experiences?
Ooh, okay. Probably trekking and traveling around Patagonia in Argentina, with a couple of people who I became real close to, an Australian friend who I also met at the same Spanish school in Buenos Aires.
Yeah, I met him too.
Yeah, Clayton, yeah. So we traveled around in a beaten up, well, actually I say beaten up, it was in great condition, an old 1973 Ford Falcon on a kind of classic road trip through Patagonia, stopping off in places and trekking and meeting people. And that was a really special experience because you're able to get off the very beaten track of the kind of traditional backpacker trail that follows a certain route that the buses take. You have your own transport. So, and rolling into town in a classic motor that everyone recognizes in Argentina almost makes you local celebrities instantly, which is great fun. So that whole period was probably the highlight of my last trip.
I just wanted to ask also, because what's interesting is that wasn't planned, right? I mean, you didn't know Clayton before you went to South America.
No, and that's probably a big part of why it's such a highlight, because it wasn't planned at all, and we didn't plan really our movements in the car. We kind of, we knew we wanted to go kind of from north to south, but the route was generally made up on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis.
Right.
And it was that's a real freedom of traveling in that way, and that's what made it so special. Yeah.
Awesome. So, sorry, yeah, I think you were gonna say something else.
Probably other top highlights will have been memories of surfing, because surfing is probably for me the most special of all the sort of outdoor activities that I've done, mainly because it's so hard to get good at and get all the conditions in the right place, particularly when you're traveling, that when it does happen, it comes together, you score some great waves with people that you like, and it's not too crowded. There's really nothing else quite like it. And I was lucky enough to get that in Indonesia and in New Zealand on both trips, actually. So
yeah, and I have to say, following your Facebook feed, I know that you also you took some bumps doing surfing, because I remember seeing some pictures with some pretty big bruises.
Yeah, well, that was me kind of coming back to surfing after probably nearly 2 years out, so I was a bit rusty. And yeah, I took out a 9-foot hardboard, which, you know, if that hits you in the wrong place, it does some damage. And yeah, I think the second surf I went out on, it came down on my head and gave me quite a nasty bump. And then the other one that you probably saw was Indonesia, my first ever close contact with a coral reef. And that was when I was actually feeling a lot more technically competent and comfortable in my surfing, but I was just in some fairly big waves that caught me by surprise and slammed me on my back on the reef and dragged me backwards underwater, which, you know, it's all part of the fun for surfing in Indonesia, apparently. But that was my first experience.
Well, I'm learning to surf here in Mexico on tiny little waves in Sayulita and loving it. But I've had quite a few bumps and lungs full of water and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's great fun. It's great fun.
Awesome. Well, okay, so I also wanted to ask you for balance about, your worst experiences traveling.
Okay. Being robbed in Costa Rica 2 weeks into my first trip was a bit of a downer. But on the flip side, I learned a huge lesson from it as well. I left my bag with my friend, but to put it in perspective, between us we had 2 surfboard bags, which are like 3 meters long, 20 kilos each, and 2 big 20-kilo rucksacks, and a small rucksack each as well. So we got a lot of kit, and we're waiting at a bus stop. And my friend John didn't speak much Spanish, and I left the stuff with him to cross the road and get water for the bus journey we were about to get on. He got distracted by a local lady who was desperately asking for help in Spanish and a bit of English, and was kind of pointing down the road and taking his attention away. And in the blink of an eye, I guess an accomplice of hers had come in and grabbed my small rucksack, which had pretty much everything valuable I had on the trip. So my iPhone, no, it wasn't an iPhone at that stage, actually. I think I had a phone, no. Yeah. My camera, my iPod, my passport, my round-the-world tickets, everything really.
No.
Value. So that was hard.
And that was right at the beginning of your trip as well?
2 weeks in, yeah, the first country we arrived in. So but having said that, within a few hours, I was just focused on the fact that it's just stuff. It's all replaceable. The trip was going to go on regardless, and it meant we were delayed in San Jose in Costa Rica for an extra week, which wasn't really the plan. But we had a lot of fun, and it all worked out fine. So no big deal. That's what's insurance for.
Yeah.
Other downers, nothing really that stands out. But obviously, when you do a lot of traveling in places like Africa and India and some parts of Southeast Asia, you see a lot of poverty, and you see a lot of people just who have absolutely nothing on the streets, and you wish you could somehow help them all. Reality is, you kind of help people as you go along. But yeah, that always puts a bit of a weight on some occasions during a trip. But that's the world we live in, and like I say, doing some of that volunteer work and bringing awareness and some of that awareness back to people, I guess, who haven't seen those kind of things in your group of friends and acquaintances in the UK is a positive to be taken out of that.
Right, absolutely. So just to finish up, I wanted to ask you, for people who have listened to this and who think that this is something that they're really interested but haven't done, any thoughts about things that you learned, things to avoid, or things you didn't know before you planned this trip? Sort of any tips, basically, for people who are thinking about doing long-term travel like this?
Try and fill the trip with things that you love doing, but travel light. Because I always tried to fill my trip with things I love doing, and that meant that I always ended up traveling heavy. And that's probably another slight downer I could pick up, I guess, another learning point, that the lighter the travel, the more opportunity you have to be flexible in how you do things. So really think about what you're taking with you and whether you really need it, because you don't actually need much. And you meet people now traveling across continents with a small rucksack on the back, and that's it. So yeah, that would be a key tip. Other than that, just go with a completely open mind as much as possible about everything, and don't believe everything you read, because it's amazing the amount of warnings and over cautious advice, particularly on the internet, about going traveling and the dangers. The reality is there are very few, only in big cities, where you're right to be cautious in big cities that you live in at home. Never abroad. Those are the only areas where I would add some caution and where you need to stay on alert. Outside of that, really, you find the world very friendly, and like I say, just have an open mind. But awesome. Do it, absolutely do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love it.
You have to do it. It doesn't have to be a year long, but if you can get any kind of break to go and have a bit of a break from a working world that you used to, or a career, even if you love the career, a break from it is a valuable thing for anyone, I think.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Pete. It's been really fun hearing about your experiences.
My pleasure, Jake. My pleasure. Good to talk to you again.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you have feedback about the show, please email jake@thevoluntarylife.com. If you enjoyed this program, please share the podcast with your friends or click the donate button on thevoluntarylife.com.